something that hasn't really been done before. It's kind of a combination of cosmology, consumerism. Can you guys hear me? You seem, you guys are frozen. Can you hear me okay?
Now I can, yeah.
Yeah, I think I froze for about a minute or so.
I heard cosmology and consciousness.
Okay, that's enough. That's all we need.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
All right, everyone. Here we go. Humans have been at the cosmological task a long time. I celebrate the new and startling results of our modern scientific investigation, but we need to remember that we have been involved in the enterprise of cosmology, which is the exploration of the origin, development, and destiny of the universe from the very beginning. Most spectacularly, we see signs of this in the cave paintings from as far back as 20,000 years ago in Southern Europe, when our ancestors crawled for days on their backs through the caves to gather in great,
maybe 75th or 80th
underground vaults in order to draw on the wall, to draw on the walls depictions of the animals that lived in their imagination. Other artifacts of cosmological wonderment reach back perhaps 40,000 years, and some archaeologists surmise that our human ancestors have been gathering in caves as far back as 300,000 years ago, haunted even then by the mysteries of the cosmos that filled them with terror and delight. How do our modern children learn about reality, about the universe? To answer this question, we need only reflect on what our children experience over and over again at night in a setting similar to that of children in the past who gathered in caves and listened to the chants of the elders. In terms of pure quantities of time, the answer is immediate. The cave has been replaced with the television room, the chant with the advertisement. One might say that the chant has been replaced with the television show, but in essence, the core energy that drives the action and determines whether or not the show will survive the season is the advertisement. That is the reality night after night and season after season. Television's blockbuster sitcoms come and go. The advertisement endures. What is the effect on our children? Before a child enters first grade, and before he or she has entered in any real way into our religious ceremonies, that child will have soaked in 30,000 advertisements. The time our teenagers spend watching ads is more than their total stay in high school. None of us feel very good about this, but for the most part, we just ignore it. It's background, it's just there, part of what's going on. We parents learned to accept it so long ago, we hardly think about it. But imagine how we would feel if we heard about a country that indoctrinated its citizenry with its religious dogmas in such a manner. Actually, it was just such accounts concerning the leaders of the former Soviet Union that outraged citizens of the West for decades. Reports that the government was brainwashing young children by subjecting them to Soviet lies, erasing their natural feelings for their parents or for God or for the truth of history, and replacing these with the ideological doctrines that would provide support for the dictatorship and enable it to continue its oppressive domination. Immersed in the religion of consumerism, we refuse to take such comparisons seriously. We tell ourselves soothing cliches, such as that we are free to turn off the television set. We tell ourselves that ads are nothing more than the honest efforts of our corporations to get us interested in their various products. But as with any reality that we rarely pay any serious attention to, we miss the big picture. The sheer amount of time we spend in the world of the advertisement suggests we might well devote a moment to examining that world more carefully. Advertisers, of course, are not bad persons with evil designs. They're just doing their job. On the other hand, even they would have to confess that the well-being of our children is not their primary concern. Their objective is to create ads that are successful for their country and company. And this means getting viewers interested in their product. But already we can see that this is less than desirable. After all, we parents demand that our children's teachers, to take just one example, should have our children's best interests foremost in mind. Such teachers will shape our children when they are young and vulnerable. So of course we want this shaping to be done only by people who care. To hand over so much of our children's young lives to people who obviously do not have our children's well-being foremost in mind is at the very least questionable. But on a deeper level, what we need to confront is the power of the advertiser to promulgate a worldview based on dissatisfaction and craving. One of the cliches for how to construct an ad captures the point succinctly. Quote, an ad's job is to make them unhappy with what they have. Tom.
Sorry.
That was great. I'm seeing Joseph Kearns. I'm seeing a beautiful photo of Joseph Kearns on my screen.
Joseph.
And I've just been joined by a fellow Brit at just the right time. He's muted. All right. Okay, not too right. Okay, we made it. So I am going to try to answer the question. Why, 25 years after Hidden Heart of the Cosmos, has consumerism continued to grow and grow and grow? Even though Brian Swimme has been here in the universe, actively in the universe, why has it all just continued to happen? The forces arraigned against him must be pretty damn powerful, right? Well, I do need to say that this, if we're going to answer that question as unflinchingly as we can, then this isn't going to be overly light listening. It isn't intended to be. But I do think the people I'm going to be talking about, Freud and Marx, are, whilst they are not prophets of an enchanted cosmos by any stretch of the imagination, they are particularly good at nailing sources of disenchantment. So we need Bryant to enchant. I do think, and I want to try to show, that we need Freud and Marx to identify the sources of disenchantment. So I am now going to try and share my screen. And I hope it's going to go better than it has done for the last. Okay. All right. Can you guys see me? Hello?
We can
Yeah,
see you, Tom.
It's working.
You can see my screen? Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Let me now go. Yep. Okay, sweet. Okay, let me now go to, we're there. Fantastic. All right. What you are looking at is the equation of consumerism, perhaps the equation of capitalism. And I was thinking about that equation that made me think of Brian's work in the first place, because there are so many other equations out there in the universe, so many that he's going to be talking about. But this one is growing. It's growing and it's growing and it's growing. And it was one that Marx identified late 19th century. He noticed that it had only been in place for a few centuries. This idea that you have your funds, you produce your commodity, and you get back what it costs to produce it, to advertise it, plus what you received for it. Only for the last few centuries, because before that, you had this. You had money only as a means of exchanging one thing for another. Money was a means, not an end. And part of the work that Marx did was the realization that there was a process at work whereby everything kind of shifted round or down a notch. And now what was in the center was here the commodity. What's in the center is the means. What's on the right is the end. And some process was now at work by which money had become an end in itself. You can trace that. You can trace that process, maybe starting with colonization, where the nation states are putting money into a colony with no more intention than getting money back, so mercantilism. Then you get free trade, then you get the nation states trading with everybody, but again, with no more intention than satisfying this equation. Then maybe global investment banking, where it's no longer the nation states, it's companies, it's corporations that are operating under exactly the same logic. So the banks will create money out of thin air, they will lend it, but they will lend it on the understanding that they will get more money back. And then finally, maybe in the last 100 years or so, you have consumer capitalism. You have publicly owned companies with a fiduciary right or obligation to honor the demands of their shareholders. And what their shareholders demand is that whatever they do must satisfy this equation. This is what they have to do pretty much by law. And it has very strange effects on human culture, the way this is working and the way this is happening. Because everything that you buy, everything that you consume that is produced by a publicly owned company, you know, owes its existence primarily to the fact that it will satisfy this equation. So I was thinking of many things. I was thinking of Game of Thrones. If Game of Thrones isn't part of human culture, I don't know what is, right? I mean, it was such a cultural phenomenon. And for me, the fact that you had something that had such cultural impact, themed around myth, themed around an enchanted cosmos that everyone was talking about, was thrilling. And there was even the sense that we could get something of an allegory for climate change. Winter was coming. There was this sense that we were kind of being presented with this parallel world that was imbued with myth, that was going to explore the predicament that we found ourselves in. Then it got to that final season. And we don't know why they copped out to the extent that they did, right? But there was the realization that this was entertainment not allegory. That there are so many times in contemporary culture where you reach out for culture, you reach out for a way that human beings are communicating with each other, and interacting with each other. And you get back a commodity. And you realize that that commodity owed its existence beyond anything else to satisfy this core equation that Marx came up with. And it applies in so many areas of our lives. Think of your university course. Here's your course. Here's just what you want to do, what you want to study, where you want your passion and your libido and your heart. On your left is your way of funding it. And in the middle is what it is. But increasingly, the nature of what it is changing. The sense of what it fundamentally is constituted in is a means by which you will turn the cost of your course into your future income. It is there to satisfy that equation. Here's another one. British royal family. Whenever there is a Republican movement in the UK, as there is right now after some of the things that have been going on, people will say in Britain, well, look, whatever their flaws, royal family bring a lot of money into the British economy. And therefore, whatever happens, we should keep them because they make us money. And you know, a few centuries ago, you would be hung for saying that the reason our royal family exists is to bring money into our economy. That would be treason a few centuries ago. That is not why we have them. But it's almost as though silently, without anyone being able to identify the point where it happened, the royal family became a commodity. They owed their existence to the fact that they returned more money to the country than the country put in to them. And you see how silently it happens. There's no single point in history where you can identify that process happening. It's almost like the way you can, a process in nature, say, where you have like erosion of a cliff. You can't see it happening, but you can see it when it's happened. And accepting the importance, the power of that equation doesn't make you a Marxist. I mean, there were many, many things that Marx got wrong. I mean, he thought that capitalism would eventually just run out of things to commodify. And he thought that when that happened, things would change. But he was wrong, because the commodity form is becoming so sophisticated, so insidious. It's hooking on and appropriating vulnerabilities in the human psyche so many ways, in such subtle ways. In this quote from Vine, perhaps the more recalcitrant children will require upward of 100,000 advertisements before they cave in and accept consumerism's basic message. It's a simple cosmology, told with great effect and delivered 1 billion times each day. Humans exist to work at jobs, to earn money in order to buy things. What does that mean, that quotation? Well, plugged into this equation, it means that the commodity ultimately is you. But the insidiousness of the process feels to me as though it needs to look at the human psyche to appreciate where this is going. And I want to, it's going to take us a little while to get back to consumerism, so you're going to have to bear with me. But this is from a clinical case of Stan Grof, the psychiatrist trained in psychoanalysis, but using here psychedelics as a means of therapy. He says every time his patient heard the sound of water running in a nearby bathroom, he was overcome by anger and had great difficulty in controlling his aggression. He could not tolerate the presence of a female therapist and responded to them with irritation and rude verbal attacks. This was accompanied by recurrent visions of a pale, grimacing female face. Several sessions later, new elements appeared. He saw sequences of objects relating to bathing, but they were incongruent with the intensity of the anxiety that accompanied them. All these disconnected experiences suddenly made sense when he relieved in a complex way traumatic memories from his early childhood. When he was 2 or 3 years old, he had an emotionally disturbed nurse who turned out to be psychotic, who used to frighten him, particularly while bathing. The authenticity of the recollections were later verified by his stepmother, who fired the nanny after discovering how much she'd abused the child. Why is this relevant? Well, what could you say? Say Grof is lying, stepmother's lying, although there are many, many such cases. You could say that the scenes happened but were unrelated to the symptoms. So, fundamental idea of Western depth psychology right from the outset. Things that happen to us are forgotten, and our symptoms are coded versions of this material that remains unconscious. So if we say this is the case, what it means is that there is such a thing as oppression. This is the core discovery that Freud, Jung, everyone who's followed them is depending upon. Freud says it was the cornerstone around which the whole of psychoanalysis rests, is this phenomenon. And if you were going to build a model of the psyche around this, you would have to say something like, there is an unconscious. There is where that repressed material is held. Then there's a part of the psyche that can carry the material when it's emerged into consciousness. Call it the pre-conscious, doesn't matter what you call it. And then there is consciousness. And that model has been seen as being superseded, as being wrong, as being shown to be incorrect by neuroscience and so many other things. But it's very, very hard to fault the logic of this. How does this relate to consumerism? Well, what else does it imply? It implies that traumas in our early life, if they interfere with the natural development of the child, are going to be significant, right? So what's going on for the kid around the age of 1 is breastfeeding. Not exclusively that, although the 1-year-old kid will have its own thoughts around the frequency of with which that happens. It's not aware of its bowel movements till the age of 2 or so. And it's not aware of its genitals until around about the age of 3. And this model has been widely hated and viewed with enormous suspicion ever since Freud. And even Jung, it's less present. I mean, Jungian therapists will generally incorporate this, but it was played down. And what has always struck me about this is that it's not even really a model. It's just a description of the early life of the kid. Anybody can verify. What does it mean in terms of that equation we've been thinking about, in terms of this desperate need of capitalism to produce ever more commodities, to find ever more wants in the human organism, to continue that process. Well, you can make far more money if you can divert people's attention from the way the human body looks, the way it feels rather, to the way that it looks. In terms of what's going on for the kid around the age of 2, well, it's more than anything is about control. And I think Nietzsche would say that the impetus, the need to control, has been present in a civilization ever since Socrates. It's kind of embedded into that whole kind of discourse. And in terms of the oral stage, well, think of that word consumer, right? The consumer ingests something into themselves. By definition, that's what you do if you consume. And then this phrase that emerged, I think it was around about Thatcher and Reagan, that time in the 80s, the consumer is king. It was coined, I think, unconsciously. Why the civilization chose that word consumer is up for grabs. But in 1992, this is 5 years before Hidden Heart, about 1,000 scientists signed a warning to humanity that said human beings and the natural world are on a collision course. If not checked, many of our current practices put at serious risk the future that we wish for human society and the plant and animal kingdoms. 2017, 25 years later, so there's the same 25-year gap, humanity was served with a second notice. And this time it said, soon it will be too late to shift course away from our failing trajectory, and time is running out. And it's almost as though the human species will just continue to suck on this nipple. It just refuses to stop. The nature of fixation is that the psyche just cannot shift what it's doing, no matter how hard it tries. And then you have this equation just sitting behind so much of this, the kind of the substratum, the underpinning of so much of what we witness and experience and are caught up in every day. And obviously people from outside our community would say many, many things about this. They would say that this system, this equation is the least worst system for the whole world that we know of. We don't know of a better one. For all its flaws, for all the devastation it wreaks, we don't know of anything better. And I think they might be right in terms of what's been tried so far. They would say that only through this equation can you get things like gene therapy and COVID vaccines and Game of Thrones. Only through this equation can you get the amount of money that you need to fund all the big stuff. But I do think that from the perspective of some point in the future, we will remember that this equation gives us, or perhaps gave us, climate change. So I want to finish my bit just by reading a quote from Hidden Heart. Brian says, go outside half an hour before sunset, at a time when Venus is low on the horizon. Focus your attention on Venus and keep the model of the solar system in mind. There will come a wonderful moment when you enter into it all at once, when you feel in an experiential, imaginative, and direct way the earth slowly turning away from the sun, 93 million miles away. You have a sense of the plane in which the planets move, and even a beginning recognition of the great distance to Venus. A single surprising shudder might pass through you as you realize you are standing on the back of something like a cosmic whale, one slowly rotating its great bulk on the surface of an unseen ocean. Now that is a spiritual experience, right? You cannot say that is not a spiritual experience. Try having that experience in Peru on ayahuasca, you know? But you'd be one of the first human beings to have that experience. One of the first people in history to have it, even in the indigenous tradition. Even in that tradition of human beings living in harmony with nature, in harmony with the cosmos, it wasn't available until Kepler, Copernicus, Newton. We needed them to be able to produce this experience in the first place. And so Brian says, when we do ponder the deep issues of meaning in the universe, we do so in a context fixed in the time when the classical scriptures were put into written or even verbal form. He's going to talk more about this, but I believe that's where his whole cosmology is drawing from. It's drawing from an understanding of the material universe that is new, and that is more nuanced, and that is more informed. And these core ideas of Marx and Freud, which I think are just fairly straightforward expressions of an underlying reality, similar to Copernicus in that sense. It's the same problem. They're not in the scriptures. Well, then we need new scriptures. And this idea that the more we learn about the material universe, the more we learn about this underlying biological reality, the more disenchanted we become, which has been said about Copernicus, about Marx, about Freud. Really? Think of this experience we're looking at. Isn't all of this just a foundation upon which a new form of spirituality is built? So we don't know what the universe is going to do with that core equation that we looked at. It does seem to be inevitably growing. But there is something else that seems to be, to me, to be almost inevitable as well, which is that we will continue to find modalities of healing and growth and understanding that we didn't predict. You think of the 20th century. Think of all the things that happened in the last century, the growth of psychoanalysis, general relativity, galaxies beyond the Milky Way, psychedelic therapy, quantum physics. You know, is it really plausible that in this century there won't be other unexpected developments? Think of quantum physics. Think of the way that by becoming conscious of something, you create it. Right? Couldn't that be a bridge with depth psychology and with the unconscious, a bridge between the consciousness and the cosmology that we study in PCC? So in what follows from Brian, you won't see an answer to what's going to happen. He probably knows, but he's not going to tell us. But what I would say is, as you listen to what follows, is just look for the number of twists in the plot. Look for the number of times the universe changes something into its opposite. Look for the number of times that something completely unexpected happens. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to turn it over to Brian. I'm then going to jump back with Brian's slides. So, Brian.
Very, very, very cool, Tom. Just I love that equation. Excuse me. it's odd to say I love that equation. I'm just saying I love the equation. It's killing them, but it's the clarity it brings is fantastic. And you know, I know, unfortunately, next to nothing about Marx, and even less about Freud, but I do think there's an amazing connection there that you're between what you're saying and cosmology. You know, if I were young, I think I would dive into that and make it. That connection is so alive. Okay, so I love that line. He probably knows, but he won't tell us. I mean, only you, Tom. But here's what I want to do. I want to. I just love what you said there at the end, that we're at the brink of a new spirituality. We're in the first days, the first months, first years of a new spirituality. And so I'm just going to make some very broad statements, and as a way of capturing what I think Thomas is moving toward, and that I certainly want to move in that direction too. Okay, here we go. Now, this first statement is a challenge for many people, but just think about it. What happened? No slides. Tom? I lost everybody.
Oh, tell
thanks.
me
Okay,
when you want the slides. I thought that was my cue. I thought that was my cue. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We had that worked out. I'm sorry, I blew it. No, I'll make it really clear. Okay, so here's the first big statement, and it comes from Thomas Berry, and he says we're in between stories. So, Thomas Berry studied the cultures all around the planet. Every culture he looked at has a fundamental story. The story holds the action of a culture, of a civilization. So his statement of saying we're in between stories means that we are in a very, very vulnerable, dangerous place. All right, now, fine. Now I'm going to tell you what the new story is, okay? The new story is the discovery of self-organizing creativity. That really is the fundamental insight. Now, that's not the only way at it. I'm not saying this is the only way to talk about it, but I want to focus on that and connect it to what Tom has been saying. Self-organizing creativity is the discovery. Now, here's the challenging statement I wanted you to think about. Creativity is not a fundamental category in any of the traditional religions. Now, I've been saying this for a long time, and it's not even my insight, but every time I bring it up, I have to defend it, because it sounds like I'm putting down traditional religions. I'm not. It's just a fact. There's redemption, there's enlightenment, there's forgiveness, there's gratitude, there's all these amazing spiritual qualities that are identified and nurtured throughout the wisdom traditions of our planet, but not creativity. And here's the reason why. The traditional cultures lived in a universe that had already been structured. The structure of the cosmos was there. It might be in decline. A lot of cultures saw it going downhill and required sacrifice to build it back up and so forth. But the order was there. We have discovered a different universe. The universe we've discovered is creating its order. It's always in the process of bringing forth a new order. So now going back to what Thomas presented, the fundamental orientation of the modern period is given to us by Descartes. All of us have studied this. I just want to emphasize one thing, is that res extensa, the matter of the universe, right, is without a mind. So you got the mind inside the head, the pineal gland, and then you have the stuff out there, which is only something that you can talk about its extension. Now, that move, Descartes, brilliant. I mean, what he discovered about consciousness, absolutely revolutionary, no question about it. But his lack of imagination with matter. Why would he think otherwise? He too lived in a universe that was already established, and matter itself is seen as inferior. So that you have the great bulk of traditional religions has to do with going above matter, escaping matter, make it to heaven, not being dragged down by matter. It's demonized. We know all about that. But the one point I want to bring home to you is that it was considered inert. And the only way it could do anything is if we shaped it. Now, do you see then that a fetish around commodities would develop? So you have a forest, and then you're going to develop the forest, right, by turning it into commodities. Here's the big shift. The big shift is that every aspect of the universe from the beginning participates in the most magnificent creative action anyone has ever imagined. I mean, you can find the wildest myth from any place around the planet, and it's nothing close to the radical assertions of a time developmental universe. So in a broad stroke, with a broad stroke, I would say this. Our fundamental notion of value and success is going to shift from the manipulation of matter into commodities for money, shift from that to effective participation in the creative community in which we find ourselves. It doesn't matter if you're on the moon or Mars or Jupiter or you're in an Andromeda galaxy, wherever you are, the universe is involved in its creative action, wherever it is. You could be a banker, an accountant, a professor, a boxer. No matter what role we're playing, we are participating in a system of creativity. And the main difference between us and other species, we're aware of it. We've become aware of it. And which means, going back to how Tom ended his talk, which means what is open to us is an actual experience of participating in creativity, an actual experience. Now, I'm going to go to a couple images And I really do think, that what I'm presenting with these images is one little tiny part of a new spiritual practice. The same one Tom ended on. It's a tiny part of a new spiritual practice. People that are far more skilled than I am are going to develop this. It's part of the monumental shift into a new story that Thomas Berry's talking about. Okay, ready, Tom? If you could show the first slide, that'd be great.
Are you guys seeing it?
There it is. Okay, great. Fantastic, everyone. All right, now, now we're moving into the moment of, it's still, what I'm saying will be conceptual because I'm using language, but I'm hoping some of you will actually participate in experiencing this tonight as you go outside. All right, now this is an image of, this is the ultra deep field is called. This is an image of galaxies. In every direction you look, it would be a similar picture like this. Now, okay. Each one of these little lights, these little dots, represents either a galaxy or a galaxy cluster. Okay, first a quantity. I want you to consider a quantity. If you go out tonight and you look up in the night sky, it might be cloudy. It doesn't matter. You might see a few stars. You might see a lot of stars, depending where you are. But if you just hold your hand at arm's length and you stare at one of your fingernails, just one of your fingernails, and you imagine looking through the fingernail all the way to the edge of the universe. There are a million galaxies in that pencil thin shaft that goes from your finger out to the edge of the universe. Now, okay, a million galaxies. It's hard to imagine a million galaxies, but the nearest galaxy among a couple dozen to our Milky Way galaxy is Canis Major dwarf galaxy. It's 25,000 light years away. That's the nearest one. 25,000 light years away. Each light year is 6 trillion miles. So when we think about where we are, it's actually helpful to experience the immensity as a mind-blowing fact. For some people, it's exhilarating. For other people, it's terrifying. But the main thing to get is this is where we're at. So each of the galaxies let's start off with our Milky Way galaxy. Our Milky Way galaxy has something like 100 billion planets. Around 6 billion of these are Earth-like. It's easy to imagine, at least from the point of view of chemistry and physics, it's easy to imagine that millions of these are alive, and that life permeates the 2 trillion galaxies that we know about. So just before I leave this image, I just want you to, again, when you're out there looking at your pinky, your fingernail, and imagine these galaxies, the last thing to imagine as you're taking this in is that the whole thing is expanding. And those of you that know me know that every chance I get, I tell people the universe is expanding. And because the stunning fact is that if the expansion had been different, we wouldn't be here. Now, here is a spiritual challenge. Take that in. See if you can experience that. It means that the dynamics of the entire universe are essential for our existence. So simultaneously, we are just an individual inside this vast space, and there's a way in which we are the whole of things. The dynamic of the whole is intrinsic to our existence. Okay, Tom, can I have the next image? There it is. Okay. All right. Now, okay, this would be an image of a galaxy that's similar to our own. And I want now to see if I can give you a sense of not just the universe being creative, but of you yourself as being inside the creativity. So here we have a spiral galaxy with these arms. The arms are waves that generate stars. The arms have been constructed by the galaxy. This would be a fantastic image of what we mean by self-organizing creativity. So if you go back 12 billion years ago, this was just a cloud. And the nature of the universe ignited activity that led to this cloud developing these arms. The arms created the stars exploded and gave birth to the planets and ourselves. So that the creativity of the galaxy is what assembled us. We come out of that creativity. The wave that generates the stars passes through every 70 million years. So this isn't a creativity that ended. It's an ongoing creativity that gave birth to us and that we are inside of. Okay, the next one, Tom, and then in fact go to the next one after this. Tom, do you know how to go backwards with the slides? It's okay if you don't. I'm just curious. Can you go backwards? Okay, great, good. Okay, then please go forward. Please go forward. Yeah, there we go. Okay, stop. Now, gang, everyone, this is the best thing I've got right here. The next two slides, this is it. This is the climax of my life, all right? This is the climax of my life. And I do think that these two images are a way in to experiencing ourselves for what we are. It's a new understanding of what we are, this new story. Okay, now what we're looking at is lava, and the image before was those were rocks on Mars. But the main point is that rocky planets, you know, can melt, all right, and so that at one time the entire Earth was molten lava, and so then the molten lava. Now we just go to the next image. Okay, the molten lava gave birth to the orangutan. Now, that is the most like unbelievable fact. Could you go back again to the lava? Okay, now what I want you to do is you take in, we're looking at molten rock, all right? And now go forward, Tom, would you? And now the molten rock, now really focus in on the eyes of the orangutan. Rock created those eyes. You see, it's so matter is ontologically radically different than what Descartes and the entire modern period thought. It radically different. It is matter itself is if you like, is permeated with magic. I mean, we need words like this to realize, just to account for what has actually taken place. So now, maybe if I could go back to the whole, no more images. Tom, if you close down I just make my, yeah, okay, good. So now, so here then is my last image of a spiritual practice. Again, you go out at night and you're looking at the stars. You look at the stars, and you're now, just like Tom was saying, you're now capable of an experience that no previous culture had. Whether or not they had psychedelics or spiritual practice, or there's experience that is available to us now, and that is we can look at the stars and realize. I'm going to say this several times in a row. All right. So, and find a better way of saying it. This is the best I can do, but I'm going to say it several times so you get it. We look at the stars and we know that the stars built our body, so that we are a further development of the stars. But it's more than that. It's also the case that when we look at the stars, we're looking at that which constructed our minds. Now, mind is a great word, but here's one's even stronger. We look at the stars, we're looking at that which created our awareness. It wasn't dropped down from the sky. The stars created our awareness of the stars. So one more statement on this way. So if you're looking at the stars, you're looking at a cosmic process that actually created our bodies, our minds, our consciousness. It's a cosmic process of creativity. So let me say it again. When we look at the stars, we are looking at that which is looking. That's what we're aware of for the first time in the history of humanity. We're looking at that which is looking. I'm doing this all with stars because we know all the facts and details, but it doesn't matter what you look at or what era of your life. And so just to finish it with one last statement. When we look at the stars or we look at the ocean, let's do that. We look at the ocean and we're aware of the fish that are swimming in the ocean. And we know the fish constructed all of the brains on the planet, the reptilian brains, the amphibian brains, all the mammalian brains. The fish built all of them. So when we're at the edge of the water, and we're looking at the ocean, and we're looking at that which, again, created our ability to look. And then in that moment, we can feel the way we are the creativity that built the universe. That's our nature. And like Tom was saying, who knows what the universe is about right now, what it's building. This movement out of an idea of Descartes' res extensa into entering experientially inside the self-organizing creativity of the universe. That is what will release us from the madness of consumerism and the madness of industrial growth, and into the joy of participating in and as the creativity of the universe. I get all worked up. Oh, geez. It's just so great to be with people. Oh, I miss you all. Jeez. Tom.
Miss you too.
Yeah.
We were gonna turn this over to a group discussion if people are willing to go ahead with that. We thought we'd give it an hour or so and then we would turn it over. So if anybody has any comments they'd like to make.
Yeah, I had a question I'd like to throw out. You know, this immense creativity of rock turning into orangutan eyes. Why is it that let's call it the story of an advertisement is kind of isolated and quarantined from that mysterious magical depth? Is it because we believe that ads are created only through a reductionist modern consciousness? Or is there room to allow that power of the stars, to see that power of the stars in the insurance ad as well, at least as a partial truth of what that insurance ad is, if not the whole thing?
Yeah, of course, Abir, you're asking the deep question of, uh, is everything good? Are some things bad? You know, like, so that where does discernment come in? Where does it come in? And you know, obviously, a really deep project. But just to give you my own orientation is that uh, things are good, like technology is good and advertisement is good if it activates a vibrant earth community. If it actually is if it's participating in bringing forth a flourishing planet. And this is going to require great ads, fantastic ads, ones that generate all kinds of energy for particular kinds of creativity, for sure. And likewise, the technology that actually will activate a new era, a new era of life, vitality. Yeah. So that would be Tom.
Well, there's something that's emerged in the last few decades, that maybe just the last decade, that I would call something like narrative capitalism, where for the companies, for the brands, it's all about telling your story. You will find that phrase everywhere. And it's almost as though the story that they tell can be great, but it's always a story that necessitates you turning a blind eye to the equation that we were talking about. It's as though they will give you that story, but you know, just don't pay much attention to the underlying fabric of why they're doing what they're doing. So I don't know, Abir. I know that I very much had you in mind as I was writing that talk and doing what I could to kind of navigate a path between honoring what needs to be honored and challenging what needs to be challenged. But I don't have any answers beyond that.
Raymond.
Hi guys. Well, first of all, thanks Brian and Tom for the presentations. It's honestly my first time attending a PCC forum. I'm just a prospective student, but I was invited.
Wow. That's heavy. I wish you'd told me that beforehand. I would have cut back a little bit. Raymond, yeah. What was it like for you?
I honestly, I appreciate it. Like, I'm just sort of simultaneously like full of nerves and at the same time energized, because I feel like, you know, I see a lot of kindred spirits, and that's always nice, especially now when everyone's, you know, in our own boxes.
Yeah.
So as you guys were talking, and I hope this didn't take too much time, but I was just like taking some notes so I could organize my thoughts before I said anything. And it seems like, Tom, with that, with your equation, so that's sort of supposed to represent capitalism. I kind of wonder if it doesn't start with funds, but it starts with just, you know, a means of addressing a need. Because in that sense, like, I feel like you can see luxury and disparity and sort of a master-slave dominance and excess, like before capitalist modes of organization. And so in that sense, maybe the problem is like greed, or really like our disrespect with of the rest of the world, the rest of nature. And that's kind of what you touched on with like the idea of it being tied to the colonial era. And so you know, it makes sense that that this would be a problem of awareness. But I kind of wonder maybe that the root cause is just one of aligning ourselves to have more respect for nature, which I suppose ties into feeding ourselves with awe in almost a religious sense, and also sort of like as a competitor to the ways in which stories and narratives and culture can be used as propaganda to like support an existing machine. So I guess maybe that's sort of a comment, and then my question is like, how are we, both in our daily lives and as a sort of an emerging group of people, how are we essentially replacing the current, how are we sort of affecting change to sort of replace the current story with one that is based on that respect? I would imagine that it would come through art, in some sense, at least. I know, Tom, that when you were talking about sort of joining Freud and Marx together, my first thought was like Marcuse, and he talks about that a lot in One-Dimensional Man, Eros and Civilization. That like you kind of need almost this, I'm going to use a Star Wars term, like a rebel alliance, as opposed to like just being dulled into insensitivity, to have like people pulled together from the most marginalized communities because they're the ones with the most stake in the game, and sort of being radical in terms of creating new stories, creating new ways of relating to each other and to nature. But I guess, I hope this isn't too rambly, but how would you guys suggest we as a group and just people at large go about that? Hope that made sense.
It makes total sense, Raymond. Thank you. That was really, really good, helpful stuff. You said change will come through art. And there's something very, very poignant, I feel, about the way that when capitalism is producing our railroads and our corn and our material well-being, there's a very good case for saying that it's doing a great job. When it starts to produce our culture, something very, very strange and interesting happens. And so if you think about what you said, change will come through art. Well, art itself can be now traced in most of the music that you listen to, in the TV shows that you watch, and the films that you watch, all the way back to a publicly owned company with an obligation to its shareholders to maximize profit. And so how art can address that and challenge that and deal with that is one of the huge questions. But I do feel that art is the pivotal means by which humanity understands the world it finds itself in. It always has been, it always will be. And the appropriation of art by profit, as you say, I mean, the Frankfurt School is brilliant at this. The neo-Marxist thinkers who were talking more in terms of culture are really, really important for this. But yeah, they're great questions and they're great points. Thank you. Ryan, you're unmuted. You have things to say.
Me? Oh,
Yes.
no. I was going to say, does this mean it's Miller time? Maybe we're all talked out. So that's.
I'm sure
I have a
few people
question.
can-
Sean Kelly shows up. Oh God, Sean, what are you thinking about?
Well, I think Missy beat me to it. So you go ahead, Missy.
Oh,
If there's
Missy.
time,
Yeah. Oh,
I'll
absolutely.
ask.
Yes, you did.
Thank you, Brian.
Hi,
So,
Missy.
hi, Brian. So this is a quick question, and it's probably going to be an easy one. So my
Got
whole
it.
dissertation was about building practices to feel the kingdoms of life in me in an experiential way. And I know that you've written a lot about how to feel the universe through the powers of the universe. And I always look at that list and I think about, oh, how can I feel them today? But do you have any new ones?
Well, yeah, I do have. Here's my latest one. This is, they have all these spiritual disciplines where people risk their lives, right? And you meditate for 10 years in a row without eating. But here's mine. I drop a pencil in my hand. I mean, I know this sounds weird, but the Cartesian view, is that the pen has weight, and that's why it's falling. It has weight, but actually, if you can imagine, if I was in outer space and I dropped the pen, it wouldn't budge. It wouldn't budge at all in outer space, because it's the whole idea of weight is a wrong way of thinking. What we feel is an interruption of a relationship, the relationship between the pen and the earth. That's what we feel. And so, in other words, so here's the main point when we're all done. That relationship has a name. We call it gravity. So when I do this, I'm reminded that right here in my little hand is the power that built the galaxies. It's not out there somewhere, it's right here. It's right here. So this is the kind of like the lazy man spiritual practice.
Yeah, I was thinking of that equation almost as like a shadow cosmological power. So the way that Brian will talk of these basic powers of the cosmos, and thinking of that equation of Marx as almost like a shadow version of that, something that is taking us to a place that we can't quite imagine.
Yeah, that's a great equation. Just so clarifying. I remember, I'll tell everybody a story about Tom. This was, I don't know, let's say 8 years ago. And he just said, Brian, in traditional cultures, we would save up money and we'd use that to create something. That was what it's all about. But he goes, in our culture, people are always wondering, how can I get paid for this? How can I generate some money for this novel and so forth? That one shift was like, for me, was a major step out of industrial culture. So to me, it's Tom, I organize myself around that. Oh, look who shows up. Matt, you weren't here all this time.
At the last minute to save us all.
No way.
He's the man that has the answer. He's the man.
No, I've just been listening in the background and loving every minute of it. And I do have a question, but I think Sean wanted to ask something, didn't he?
Yeah. Sean.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, Brian, and Tom, I love this revisiting of Hidden Heart of the Cosmos and what you're bringing to it, Tom, with your own depth perspective on the evils of, well, let's say it, capitalism. Okay. Not to say that there aren't goods that have come from capitalism or that all capitalists are evil, but the evil of capitalism, put it that way. But here's my question, Brian. Well, first of all, just the way you highlighted the epochal difference between the pre-modern, or between even early modern, and the post Einsteinian, post Hubble view of a time developmental cosmos, and the inherent creativity, self-organizational creativity of matter. I think it's so brilliant. I've never heard you give it in such a focused way.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you.
No, it's so good. So here's my
20
question.
years to get to that,
Oh, I know. And yeah. So when you're looking at the stars, though, And like I noticed, sometimes you say this: the stars created, or the galaxies created the stars created life. But at other times you say that the stars and life and the galaxies are all part of a perhaps more mysterious cosmological creativity, some kind of creativity that, used to be called God. We don't know what to call it. We can call it creativity. But it's different. So to me, there's a difference between saying that there's a creativity that permeates the whole cosmos, which gives rise to stars that evolve into planets that evolve into life and so on. That's different than saying the stars created life. Here's an analogy. If you look back at your 5-year-old self, certainly what happened to you at 5 has had a profound influence on who you are now. But I don't think you would say that the 5-year-old self created you, the later phase of you. So if you look at Brian Swimme as a time developmental process, I don't think you would say that the embryo created Brian looking at the stars, realizing that the stars, that he is the stars looking at itself, right?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. Does it go? Is that the question?
Well, if you get what I'm getting at, I'm not saying it very well, but if you get what I'm getting at, please, please.
Okay, I'll give it a shot. So that first of all, the questions you're asking are subtle, and I haven't even thought about them deeply enough to have something that is anything like an answer. You know what I mean? Because I think we're in territory that's unexplored. So we're like pre-Socratics. So what I'm saying is always kind of rough. But the way I would say it is this: first of all, it's very interesting how you've distinguished like creativity from the matter that's creative. And so there's a relationship that has to be worked out there, right? My way of thinking about it, which I'm not saying is final, but my way of thinking about it is that we have to find a way to see all of the creativity as rooted in relationship. So when I do the dropping the pen, that's a relationship between the pen and the earth. Now that's the one thing I want to say. And here's the second thing. The second thing is that somehow we have to escape the Cartesian view of matter, which is predominant in modern science. And that the difficulty with the Cartesian view of matter is that it imagines each piece of matter can be identified with a place in space-time. And what that leaves off is the presence of the whole. So when I was talking about the expansion of the universe, I was trying to get across the idea that the dynamism of the whole is somehow present in the part, the human or any complex being. So that now going back then to your question about looking back to my 5-year-old self, I would say yes, I would say that the 5-year-old self is creating me. It's a process. And think of everything that's involved with that 5-year-old. All the fish are there. They invented the brain. Then you've got the lungs. There's so much acting there. So it's just a 5-year-old, and yet the whole is also present there. So I think we probably both agree that to say that the stars by themselves create us is to leave out the whole. But to speak of the stars as a particular manifestation of the whole, then it would be an accurate statement. So I'm just gesturing, Sean, but that's.
I love it. That's great. And at some point, I hope we can explore this idea of the whole. And
we should write a 500-page book on it. Seriously, this is the kind of thing that.
That's great. Thank you, Brian.
Oh.
Have you noticed, Brian, how we presented the cosmology and the consciousness, and now the philosophers are here? So, you know, we've got to raise our game now. I thought I was a philosopher until I met Sean and Matt, and you know, then I thought, I'm a consciousness person. I'm not a philosopher.
I've heard you talk about Hegel. That was one of the greatest talks you and Matt gave. Oh, I love that. What a night that was. God. But Matt, save us, Matt.
Oh, I don't know about that, but yeah, I have a question that I think that both of you might have something to say to. I think, you know, Brian, the universe story as you tell it, and the relationship that you're articulating that exists between, you know, our eyes or the orangutan or, you know, any conscious sentient life form and this galactic and, you know, stellar process of evolution is profound and deeply enchanting. But I think there's something about the way that science, I think physics and cosmology are like, so it's hard not to be enchanted. But when you look at, earlier today, I read this article in an anthropology journal about a team in Israel, and they were saying that, these early hominids that were in the caves, you know, many tens of thousands of years ago, and we have the paintings of animals, and it seems like the birth of symbolic consciousness, right? Their claim is that these people brought fire into the caves with them, and that it lowered the oxygen levels, and they were basically, they were high because of the low oxygen levels. It's like this explanation of the emergence of symbolic consciousness is offered as the result of an accidental, almost auto-asphyxiation. And so it seems to me that's a very disenchanted understanding. And so I don't know that consumerism is necessarily to blame for that type of scientific attitude. And maybe this is the Cartesian mentality, but why in science does it persist when this larger universe story at the level of our understanding of physics doesn't live in physicists don't live in a Cartesian universe anymore. But I feel like a lot of the biologists and anthropologists and psychologists haven't really gotten the memo on that one. And so that's a question for you, Brian. Like, what's the delay here in the distribution of the message through the various scientific disciplines that we live in a self-organizing universe? And then for Tom, it's a simple question. What is money, and how is money related to symbolic consciousness? In the sense that if you look at some anthropological research that maybe is a little bit better, like the book by David Graeber on debt, he talks about how, you know, Greek philosophy and the whole axial revolution in consciousness across various cultures was also at the same time coinage was being invented and a different kind of money. And it seems like there's a connection between the emergence of a certain kind of money and this abstract capacity for thought. And I just wonder if you've taken note of that connection and what you make of it, and then help us understand the nature of money and how it's related to this equation that is so brilliant in revealing the nature of capitalism. So that's
and
those
Tom,
two questions.
Tom, please start.
Well, there is a very fine psychoanalyst called Jacques Lacan who will talk of, this is going to be really hard to summarize in like, what he calls the object petit a is the, if you like, the point of separation into the wider society. It kind of demarcates the point of separation from the mother, the entry into the wider world. And the idea is that the commodity form, and even money generally, is actually appropriating that point of separation. There's a very fine French philosopher called Jean Baudrillard, who I'd recommend to anyone thinking about your question, Slavoj Žižek also. But the identification of money with some kind of appropriation of our means of exchange as human beings, of reciprocity, some kind of intervention in the act of reciprocity between one human being and another gets intruded upon and gets appropriated. And you could well say that because these huge big societies that we're living in now, there is no way that you can have proper reciprocity anyway, because you're doing it over Zoom. You're interacting over Zoom, you're interacting over the internet, over, you know, webcams and so on. You can't actually meet everyone you interact with in your life face to face and have a proper interaction and exchange with them. Money is necessary. You can't avoid it. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that argument. But the idea that, that there is some kind of intervention, some kind of appropriation of exchange and of reciprocity in the form of the commodity is the best I can do with that. Fine. Brian, you're muted. Brian?
Yeah. Matt, I would just throw this out. You and I would both agree, and probably everybody here would agree, that the fundamental difficulty, say with materialist biologists or anthropologists, is they're captured by reductionism, right? Matt? Yeah. So the question then would be, the question is, why are they captured by reductionism? You know, why can't they escape from it the way the physicists have, right? And at least my way of thinking about it is that because they haven't been forced into it, they haven't been forced into it. They limit their concern down to that domain where natural selection, genetic mutation, gives them the results that they feel good with. The physicists didn't want to give up reductionism. You know, I mean, that was just, it was like we had to have our face just pushed into it. As no way could that be maintained. So that's how I tend to think of it, is that the reductionism, okay. Another way to ask the question in general is this. I'm going back to the talk you and Tom gave, you know, that what's the negation? What's the negation that's taking place? The Hegelian negation is at this time. So we're moving forward, but some things are going to be left behind. And I tried to indicate a couple of them, but one of them would be reductionism. Another would be the materialism of Descartes. I mean, that of the res extensa. Another one was one I was talking to Sean about, is the idea that we can locate a piece of matter in one place in space and time. And the biologists and the anthropologists are going to be the last to join the parade. I remember when we invited Stephen Jay Gould out to San Francisco for 4 days of lectures and discussion. And, you know, I was bothered by the biology, just like you, Matt. And so I had a plan. I was going to get together with him and show him that the stuff we're learning in physics has implications in biology, and to, give him a bigger view. This is like the great Stephen Jay Gould. Only because I knew somebody that knew him could I talk him into coming, you know. And so I got in the taxi cab, sat down, the start of like 3 days of conversation. And I said, Steve, I really have this, I want you to hear the connection between what you're doing in biology and physics. And he interrupted me and says, I don't care beans about physics. That was it. He wouldn't even discuss it. You see, so he's maintaining a domain of where he could exercise a kind of control. He wouldn't open up to the larger universe. It never got any better either. Never, you know, the whole time. Brutal waste of money. Sabina. Yeah, your hand went up, Sabina. I saw it.
I was just laughing at you, Brian.
Not with me, at me, huh?
Waving.
Oh, we have this little island of sanity in the great chaotic sea of Marx's equation. This is...
I have something I could say.
Who's talking?
Bruce.
Hey, Bruce.
Bruce. Oh, there you are. Good,
Yeah.
Bruce. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to go back
Finally.
to, yeah, well, you know, I couldn't stay quiet forever.
I noticed Mary's not there.
Well, she's got the
Oh,
cat. Just going back, you know, to the thinking of the wonderful equation there, and then trying to combine it with the cosmology. And I go back to one of the problems we have is the foundations of economics, going back to Smith, Adam Smith, and it was completely a Cartesian formulation, you know, and he was trying to emulate, you know, Newtonian physics in his models. And the problem is economics has never evolved. It hasn't caught up to modern physics.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, but what's even worse though, is that the economists have stuck with, you know, they've actually gone backwards and tried to, you know, reclaim this original, you know, classical economics as, you know, as the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
But if I look back to the 25 years since your book, well, we had the advertising. Now we have this new kind of algorithm-driven advertising, which is working to make commodification, not just of, you know, of everything. I mean, of everything we do, of all the individuals, and it's using individual-driven algorithms to make advertising specifically tailored to each of us. And now with surveillance capitalism, it's done using the psychology, like Tom's talking about, with, you know, specific psychology of getting right into our brains. If you read the Shoshana Zuboff's book,
Yeah.
they know exactly what they're doing. So we're actually going the wrong direction with the advertising now to get right into us and commodify everything we do. So to me, it seems like we really, of course, need to have a holistic model, which is like replicating what the universe is doing, replicating biology and physics, but it hasn't caught up yet. And there are people
absolutely.
trying to do this.
Pardon
There
me?
are people trying to do this.
Yeah, exactly. We're in that in-between time.
Yeah.
That's why it's such a need for for creativity.
Mm-hmm. But it's just getting away in this idea that we're all individuals with our own creativity doing different things.
Well,
and
you know, and also can I just
get all model?
I want to tie what you're saying, Bruce,
Mhm.
into Louis. You've got to tie into what Bruce is saying with the economists with political philosophers. I know you're there, Louis. Come on.
Brian, you're putting me on the spot, brother.
No, but seriously, it's like what Bruce is just saying is that, you know, the economists are going back to Adam Smith, so that they're it's like Newtonian. It's never been the thinking hasn't been updated, and you've taught me and others that political philosophers go back to Locke, and that hasn't been updated either. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but
Sure, no, I can just say a few words here. I'm sorry, I've been multitasking while being tempted to join in throughout. Unfortunately, I've
just introduce you.
Urgent job. Yeah,
Louis.
but the bottom.
Louis.
Yeah.
I just want to introduce you to everybody. Louis Herman is a professor at University of Hawaii in political philosophy, but he really is. Now, so when Bruce was talking about Adam Smith and the economists are stuck there, and Matt is talking about the biologists being stuck there, absolutely. But Louis is one of the very few political philosophers who isn't stuck back there. He's actually thinking in terms of evolutionary cosmology. So Louis, tell us something.
I mean, the extraordinary thing is, I mean, just a few obvious facts about our political philosophy is that the foundations were created at the end of feudalism and the beginning of modernity. 16th century is the transition. And then by the 17th century, we get this whole worldview that's created around the convergence of these three revolutions that had taken place, that had ended feudalism. And consumer capitalism, all the institutions which dominate our world today, are thinking about just about everything, was created on the foundations of these three converging revolutions: scientific revolution, the commercial capitalist revolution, and the Reformation. And philosophers that our institutions, that really built our institutions, Locke, Hobbes, Adam Smith, founding fathers of the American Constitution, bought into this worldview. And it is a worldview which is radically at odds with what we know about the big picture of reality. So it would be absurd to expect these institutions to be working for us.
Yeah.
So we really have to, in order to liberate ourselves from them, we've really got to go back to the story of how these institutions were created, the worldview that they were built on, which is really Newtonian, Cartesian, exactly what you've been talking about, and rethink everything, our present situation as it is now in terms of the story that you've been telling. And in the spirit that you've been telling it, I mean, you've really been, in your being, you embody a human being who is attuned to the amazingness and the immensity of the cosmos as we are beginning to understand it through physics and evolutionary cosmology and transpersonal psychology and so on. And so slowly, we've got to rebuild an entire political philosophy and appropriate institutions, but we do it from where we are with what we have. And, you know, this gathering in itself is a sort of a microcosmic effort in that direction. So I'm just thrilled to be part of this, folks, and so jump in. You know, sorry that I, you know, had to be sort of half in, half out throughout.
Yeah, he's department chairman, so you know, you're so impossibly busy. But Future Primal is Louis' book, Future Primal, and it's like, you know, he had Fritjof Capra did Tao physics, and that was like a major move into a new way of thinking. Louis is doing that from the political point of view. So highly recommended. Thanks, Louis.
Thanks for that, brother. Yeah, next time with more preparation, I'd love to join in.
That was
great.
Yeah,
good to see you, folks. Good to see you, Sean. I think Sean's the only one that I reckon. It's been a while. Yeah.
Good to see you
Great to be in touch again. Yeah.
And I think you know Robert McDermott.
Oh, Robert. Sure.
Yeah.
Good to see you also. Great to be part of this gathering again. I mean, this is the work of the Institute of PCC has been inspiration to me for years, for decades, as soon as I discovered Brian.
And Louis, do you remember Matt? Do you remember Matt Siegel? You had conversations with Matt,
right,
Matt?
Yes.
Well, Matt is now, he created the online program at PCC.
Oh, fantastic.
So, yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, this is
single-handedly.
This is the platform for
it wasn't even, it was even,
culture.
Yeah, exactly. Even though he wears a t-shirt. Yeah.
I'm also wearing a t-shirt. Yeah.
So am I.
There you go. Fantastic, guys. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Louis.
Much appreciated.
Yeah. No, great to be here. Hopefully there'll be other occasions.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
I just want to say, maybe I can make another comment about art as being, you know, the way the new story in this new cosmology is coming into being. You know, I think that with a worldview, one embodies it in all of one's being. And, you know, I love Brian's, you know, little latest method for tuning yourself to the creative self-organizing reality of the cosmos by dropping a pencil, because it really is there in everything. And the more conscious we become of it, so we need these little heuristics to attune ourselves to this new reality. And it comes out can come out in everything that you are, in what you wear, and what you eat, and what you say. And I think we need to remember that philosophy, narrative, conversation is an art form, perhaps, the royal art form, the art of all the arts, because it's a way of bringing everything together and reflecting on it collectively and sharing it. So, it's not as if there's this one sort of special tip of the spear to change our cosmology and change our worldview. We do it in everything that we are, wherever we are, with what we have.
I know we have people waiting, but I did just want to ask you a question about your work. As I understand it, entails going back to roots of our human existence to recover what it means to be human. And one thing that I didn't quite get until I'd been studying this material the last few weeks is that this idea in Swimmian cosmology that until we had Newton, Galileo, Copernicus, we couldn't have that experience that he describes of looking up at the sunset into the sun, to Venus, and having that experience of being on this rotating hook. It couldn't be done before these scientists produced the work that they did.
Right.
And I hadn't grasped it until I came back to Hidden Heart, preparing this talk. It's a kind of new way of seeing it to me. And so I strongly believe that we need to rediscover the roots of where we came from. But one thing I've realized after reading Hidden Heart again is that there is something completely new about where we find ourselves. Before those scientists, you couldn't watch a sunset and have the experience that you can now have. And that is something that I find really thrilling, but also very daunting or challenging, because we are having to improvise here. Nobody has been here before.
Right, and also in a sense, everything was necessary to bring us to this moment. It's true at every point in the cosmic story. So although we've got to go back to beginnings, we do both. Every moment is absolutely novel, and we confronted with an immensity of possibilities and the awesomeness of our creativity. Every choice we make is could be better, it could be worse. There's no certainty in this. And so we've got to realize that at the same time, the momentum of what has created us. So, when we look at our creativity and try and deal with it now, we've got about 100,000 years of human creativity. And if we can root ourselves in that, say, that last leap into human self-reflective consciousness that took place along the beaches and in the bush of Southern Africa, we can get a sense of what our power is, what our platform is in moving forward, and what we're building with, what constrains us. We essentially 98.6% primate. We need to incorporate that and then mobilize this creative, self-reflective, ethical dimension of what it means to be a human being. Everything we do has ethical implications. Everything we eat, everything we buy, the jobs we do, the relationships we have is loaded with possibilities of good and evil, right and wrong. Getting back to that earlier question. So we need both, go back to beginnings and at the same time be aware of our, the power and creativity of the moment.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think, Laura Machete, I'm sorry, Laura Machete has just chatted something so important and so core to this question that I think it's worth reading for everybody. Haven't we also lost something? Mm-hmm. We also can never have that primal experience of the sun and Venus again, right? So following Copernicus's discovery, in a sense, you've lost a way of being in the world where you're experiencing as the center and the sun is circling you. you've lost that. So she says, how can we really judge or quantify wonder and awe such that our wonder could be at all different from our earliest ancestors? So I don't know if she's gonna show her head, but thank you, Laura. She's got a sleeping puppy, so no talking. All right, okay. But thank you. Yeah, it's a brilliant point, Laura, and
While we're thinking,
Very cool. Very, yeah, wonderful,
we-
wonderful. But Karen, you've been waiting now.
I would
Karen?
like to,
Karen, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
well, I mean, I'm working at another
Karen?
level. I have 4 grandchildren, 11 to 5. And, but I'm trying to orient them with, remember that you are not breathing in the universe. The universe is breathing through you. And anything I can, think of like that to orient them that how connected they are.
Karen,
Yes.
you've been frozen all this time. Were you talking?
Oh, yes, I was talking. Was,
Oh, no,
Could you?
I heard you fine. I heard you loud and clear, Karen. Thank you for your question. I don't know what everybody else is. Yeah, I think that was you.
Again?
I think that was you.
okay, can you hear me now?
Now I can. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I just said that I'm the grandmother of 4 children. 11 is the oldest and the youngest is 5. And I'm just trying to, as a grandmother, remind them and orient them differently, certainly than, I was raised, but because of the universe story and just simple things like, remember, you're not breathing in the universe. The universe is actually breathing through you. Just so it's more real for them. And
Cool. Very cool. Very cool.
yeah, things like that.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks, Karen. 4 grandchildren. They're going to be very different with you as a grandma.
Well, thank you for all the mentoring.
You're most welcome. Well, okay, Tom. Any last words?
Well, if they have to be last words, Brian, I mean, I'm happy to continue. I don't know how everybody else feels, but if you need to leave us, I'm sure many of us.
No, I was just sort of testing the water, taking the temperature.
it's those awkward silences that are always so weird.
Yeah.
But if anybody has any questions or, yeah, I see one right there, Sabina.
I have a question for Tom. Something you said was really pertinent for me because I work in organizations, and you talked about the storytelling. And one of the companies I'm working with is redefining the brand purpose and in a way selling the brand purpose. And what you said about it's all to make money. And I'm just wondering how, and I think Abir probably would be with me on this. I think business is a huge opportunity for us to change the story. And I'm wondering how we can do that, or what you see as some of the next steps, because I think there are a lot of people moving into those corporate environments that want a new story, but they're driven by the growth imperative.
Yeah. Well, I worked in the corporate world to fund coming here from the UK to the USA to study PCC. And what I do know is that around the kind of irreducible core of profit, those entities, those companies, those institutions are trying to create as good a world as they can, and so are the people who work within them. in terms of what I was trying to say about this interest in narrative that's emerged in capitalist discourse in the last decade, which is something completely new. You didn't used to hear corporations talking about stories, right? Until about 10 years ago. It's something very, very interesting, very, very new. I do think that the stories that certainly a publicly owned company has to tell are stories where the fundamental logic by which it cannot but operate has to be not discussed in a very overt way. I think that the story has to accommodate the basic rules by which a corporation has to behave. And so this is why, I mean, Game of Thrones was such a fascinating example, but because you have HBO, you know, the guys at HBO are trying to make Game of Thrones the best show they can make it. I mean, this is, you know, we're all in this together. We're all trying to create the best art, the most entertaining, the most evocative art we can make. But I do think that when their executives sit down and think about that final season, there may well have been aspects to Game of Thrones being an allegory for climate change that were a little difficult to accommodate and a little threatening and a little, you know, we didn't quite get what we needed in that. So again, I mean, I guess I've been in many different worlds in my life, and I'm very grateful to all of them. And I'm very aware that navigating this path between the equation, the core equation that Marx talks about, and its benefits and its fallacies and its the effect it's having is very, very hard. But I do think that we are far closer to each other than we generally think we are, regardless of where we're working. And that's one thing that I really have learned. And that, you know, if you sat some HBO executives down and put a drink in them, they would probably have a lot of empathy to all the things that we've talked about today. They would just say that for those 8 hours a day when they're working for their company, they have to act in that way that makes their company money. They have to. That's what they have to do.
Thank you.
If I could just add a bit of more color to what Sabina brought up, you know, I think sometimes in the critiques I can hear a very strong reductionist push to taking a corporation, everything it represents, all the human beings who work there, and then flattening their existence for those 8 hours into only the profit motive. And I think the critique is super important. But one company I was, you know, learning more about recently was Pixar, and the guy was talking about feeding the beast and also like taking care of the baby or something like that is a metaphor he uses to describe that you need to get the profit to pay the people who have families and children of their own, right? We can talk about collectively all of our children, but there's also an element of me as a father having to take care of my children, right? Maybe that sets people up in opposition, but that's part of the political dialectic around government responsibility versus personal responsibility. And so if you're looking at something like Pixar, I think storytelling is a very essential part of what they're doing during their time there. It's not the technology, which is how the company started and didn't get very far, but of course they need to be profitable. And many times companies which are not deeply profitable end up not existing anymore, so that profitable companies end up eating that talent, or they get absorbed. And in Pixar's case, they were bought by Disney, which is not the worst thing in the world. But I just bring this up to add a little more color into this sort of mix.
But Abir, I mean, if you think of this split between the human beings who work for HBO, for Warner Media, ultimately it's AT&T right at the top, who are creative, brilliant people, You then have the legal entity Warner Media, right, which is a entity recognized in law. It exists in law. So when Mitt Romney says corporations are people, there is a tangible truth to that, because that entity, that legal entity, is recognized in law as a person, literally. That entity cannot but operate under the laws of profit accumulation, because as you say, if it doesn't, it will die. And it will die in a very real way.
Yeah, so I would say, you know, in the world of startups, you often have this sense of early stage companies focusing on growth versus profitability. And that's this sense that if you're trying to take a very large market opportunity, it's worth, you know, reinvesting as much as you can to grow quickly before turning that dial towards becoming profitable. Amazon, for example, many people know, was only recently profitable. I think the same case was for Tesla. And so just as growth can be one value that shareholders can rally around, and investors and employees, I think there are other values that organizations which choose to structure themselves as a nonprofit, or let's say a for-profit for whatever reason, I do believe there is room for other values to guide behavior. And maybe that's not happening enough today, but it's not the case that people are like chained to the wall. That's why we live in a free market economy to some extent.
Well, I mean, it's just to state a truth to say that when an equity trader is looking at the stock, all they are thinking is this going to make me money? And so when you have publicly traded companies, the extent to which they almost get shoehorned into a position where they have no choice but to behave in a certain way, I think that is one of the most serious issues that we face.
Can I jump in here, because I just curious, and this seems to have been kind of a tension I noticed sort of the whole way, you know, and I think Sean might have said something about, you know, the evils of capitalism, and I think Brian, you mentioned something like the land ethic, but I'm going to call it the cosmic ethic, where you mentioned something to the effect of, if it's contributing to the mutual enhancement of a flourishing biosphere, it's a good thing. And it seemed like there was a question of whether capitalism is inherently problematic or if it's redeemable in some way. And so I'm just kind of thinking about, on the one hand, that equation of, you know, nature to commodifiable exchange value to, you know, this product, or I'm sorry, I forgot the equation specifically, but to me that signals a sort of a mediating process. And I guess I was just thinking, you know, with regards to, you know, us being forced to sort of sell our labor, right? And our needing to commodify the sort of wisdom that we take through, you know, graduate school, or trying to make it through and selling books that sort of capture this insight, and, you know, figuring out ways to distribute it while still, you know, maintaining a livelihood to allow us to perpetuate that. I guess my question was something to the effect of, is a corporation, you know, part of that creative self-organization and the drive to turn things into money, you know, a sort of representation of, you know, the sort of every organism's sort of directive to acquire free energy, and you know, making the connection to free market there. I wonder if you see that as just the kind of natural, you know, harmonized form of this natural process, or is it fundamentally different? Because it seems like we're then kind of still at square one, where it's like we have to self-organize creatively, but also we have to deal with money, but also, you know, can it be salvaged or something like that? And the question of whether technology is neutral or if it's the root of all evil, I guess, plays into that. So Brian, if you can address all of that, that'd be great. And you're on mute, by the way. Brian, you're on mute.
That's sad because I really did answer it perfectly. Okay, but I think that the corporation is an amazing advance, and but it's a subspecies of the ability of symbolic consciousness to organize massive numbers of humans. If you go to high school basketball game and they're all cheering and having a good time, but just replace the humans with chimpanzees, there'd be multiple homicides. I mean, it would drive them crazy. And so the power of symbolic language it's unprecedented. So it's what was required, like say to build a pyramid. I mean, pyramids were built in Egypt, of course, but hundreds and hundreds of them were built in North America, Mesoamerica, South America. The realization of humans that they are capable of doing amazing things. There's never been a mammal or reptile or anything that's built a pyramid, But we didn't know what we were doing. We're still discovering it right now. It's the amassing of immense power, and we thought, oh, okay, this is for acquiring free energy for me, for my family, for my nation. But it turns out that really, that we have a planetary power and cultural wisdom. We're in that in-between state. So I mean, incredible things are going to be accomplished by corporations as they learn to align themselves with the overall creativity of our planet, of our solar system. And so I think it's entirely natural, yeah.
Brian, I remember you telling me that creative ideas come from the margins, but powerful transformation comes from the institutions.
Yeah, those are the days when I knew stuff. Yeah, that sounds good. I like it. I can't believe I ever said it. Yeah, that's right. I got that from Thomas Berry, actually. And his wisdom was always that we go to the margins of thought and society, of cultural traditions. We go to the margins, we deepen our wisdom, and we articulate a powerful spiritual vision, and then we take it to the very center of the institutions. Just like Louis Herman was saying, these institutions, I mean, we can make fun of Newton, and we can see the mistakes he made and how limited he is. I mean, he's a genius, but I'm just saying, we're aware that we had to go beyond what he was doing. The same is true with our jurisprudence. The same is true with our economists. So we're in that period of immense creativity, but it does require it does require a deep. We have to negate the system within, in order to participate in building the system without. So I think of PCC very much as a place where this is happening, and so many of you are examples of the possibility of a deep transformation that you bring to the world. We're carriers of a new spiritual energy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just brought tonight my friend who's a science writer for NASA, and she's
Wow.
leave just now, but she said she's very moved by it.
Oh God, how wonderful! That's terrific.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
I think Matt has a question, and then we're getting on for 9 o'clock, which is about the time where I start feeling guilty for keeping the guests too late. So if you've got a question, feel free to write it down, or I'll let you ask it after Matt.
We're just also starved for human contact, so I'm glad to be here with all of you, even if virtually. So Brian, you hit on exactly what I wanted to bring into the conversation when you mentioned negation just now, and you brought it up earlier in reference to when Tom and I at Bishop's Ranch, all those, it was a couple years ago. Was that the last time we were at Bishop's Ranch? I think so.
I think so.
In Hegel's philosophy, the important role of negation and the sort of dialectical twist that happens in an unexpected way. And I think in reference to the corporation in particular, I think there's a way in which, despite all the critiques that we want to level at corporate capitalism, I'm not like, where do we turn in terms of institutions that can give the this transformation, the dynamism and energy that we need? It's not going to come from the nation state. I mean, I don't see any evidence that nation states are capable right now of doing much of anything. At least, you know, there are still some very impressive nations, but they tend to be more authoritarian in the sense that they can mobilize collective will to do things. The United States and other democratic countries are not very well organized and able to meet the threats we're facing. So if it's not going to be the nation states, you know, you start to look around and who's left. We need something transnational, clearly. Not that nations are going away, but so the corporations have created this transnational global infrastructure and culture, and we don't like what it's doing because it's running this program of extract, and consume, or is feeding us all these ads that are telling humans to consume. So we need to change that program, but with a few tweaks, I just wonder if the corporate structure, a few tweaks like, it's not just about making money, you have to also cover your social costs and your ecological costs, which currently are hidden. And you part of the social cost is workers need a better deal here. In fact, their workers should be part owners of the corporations that they work for. This is a no-brainer. I mean, this is just obvious, I think. And so with a more cooperative and people and planet oriented charter law to guide our corporate interactions, I think we might actually have a chance of salvaging the human project. But these are key shifts that I think would upset a current power structure, but they might be underway, and we might not even notice how much this process of negation and the self-overcoming of capitalism, I don't think, maybe we're just starting to recognize, or at least I've been noticing ways in which that process is accelerating. And I'm not like, I wouldn't say that I see it clearly enough to relax. I feel like we're in deep shit, but I see hints of this sort of sublation, you know, or this self-negation of capitalism, you know, to give rise to something we never would have seen coming, but it'll make a lot of sense in retrospect.
Can I jump in there, Matt? Because I would say wholeheartedly that it is happening. And it's happening really quickly. The recognition of the environmental impact, the desire to truly create a sustainable future, not only talking about recycling, but regenerating. So these are the terms that I'm hearing in my client organizations, and they're really taking it seriously. And I can send you a certain amount of information on all of that, which I think will give you the sense that it's happening, and it's starting to happen really quite quickly.
I'd love that too, Sabina. Could you send it to me as well?
Sure.
Because I agree with both of you. Absolutely. Is that the party we're all going to?
Yeah, I'm kind of to piggyback on that as well. You know, Brian, I was really struck by your conversation with Stephen Jay Gould in the taxi, and I think you know, we've sort of been talking about this antagonism, right, between a sort of life-enhancing vision and the corporate vision, and like I look to biology for a lot of my guiding principles, and I think the thing is that we all know, you know, biological realities are, you know, they can be very vicious, you know, starting with the first or second mass extinction of species when, you know, cells learned how to photosynthesize. So, you know, nature can be very red in tooth and claw, but we see these moments where there's like this new capacity is brought on board in a biological system, and it can be very ruthless in establishing itself in this sort of like fitness landscape, but it evolves just that naturally. I mean, this is the dynamic creativity, the self-organizing creativity. It evolves into something that can be very gentle and cooperative. So I think, you know, pull back the lens a little bit is like corporations. Yeah, I feel like they are going to, you know, we're seeing the beginnings of this creative system that it's going to I think it's going to surprise us where it's going, and I think that antagonism that we're seeing right now it will naturally fade away.
Yeah, that's great stuff.
Beautiful.
I mean,
Beautiful.
I think there is so much that is going to surprise us. And think of how frequently the human species was surprised in the 20th century by all these new developments that happened in physics, in psychology. And so a lot of it is just about, you know, doing what we can and just trusting that the universe is going to be presenting us with many, many new permutations of creation that we simply haven't foreseen.
Yeah, I wish that were just starting out. There's going to be so much cool stuff coming. Really cool.
You're right. Are there any last questions for Brian, Tom, or that you'd just like to pose to the group before we call it an evening?
I don't have a question. I just want to express gratitude for being in this community tonight. It was wonderful and rich, and I feel totally inspired. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Karen. And so much love to all of you all. You know, in a world of COVID, it's not often you get to share time with people you love. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for contributing to the space. And thanks for coming out to the PCC forum, which is always free, so long as people are here to share their voices and ideas, not counting the huge data servers and centers that are needed to upload the videos, but we won't talk about that. At least not this week. But thank you for coming again. Next week we have Lauren Finley, who's going to be talking on healing soil and healing ourselves. And then in 2 weeks we have Sean Kelly, who's going to be here with Jeremy Johnson on his new book on near-death experiences and the move into the Gaia scene. So let's give one either loud or silent applause for Brian and Tom. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey.
Thank you.
And thank you all as well. Hopefully you can catch up with us again next week and for many weeks after, and we'll call it an evening. Thanks,
Matt.